Morning. Weekly update time. Had loads going on this week for the radio program. I finished the edit for Martin Shaw, which is really exciting because I've basically been the guys that do radio have been teaching me how to edit, which is pretty cool. So now I've got this amazing bit of kit, DJ mic kit. Comes in this cool little box, and inside the little box you get these amazing little microphones that have these cool little hats, little fluffy things. And it's really clever. You just basically plug it into your phone. There's a bit of this. You basically plug this into your phone and records it in stereo. You get 2 channels. It's amazing. So I've learned how to do that, which is really cool. And then they taught me how to edit, which, I mean, I'm not claiming I'm the best editor of audio, but I'm doing it and had a bit of a go, and it looks pretty fun. It looks good. And I wanted to put bird song on it, and I went in the garden, and it's obviously amazing at the moment because the birds are back. The blackbirds are singing constantly. And I've got an amazing bird song track, which I have put as the kind of intro and outro. So yeah, I feel really good about that. I've booked my second interview with Mark Vernon, which I'm really excited about because Mark, as I mentioned a little bit last week, he sort of seems to be have written books or be, an expert in a lot of the things that I'm really interested in. And his journey is really fascinating because he is, I think I mentioned last time, I think he did a philosophy degree, and then he did a master's in, he did a physics degree. Then he did a MA, I think in theology, and then a PhD in philosophy. So he's like really looking at this business of living in a really interesting way. And he's a big fan of Owen Barfield, who he's written a lot about, who was one of the Inklings. So it was him, Tolkien, and C.S. Lewis were mates. Barfield was a solicitor, but one of his books was the reason C.S. Lewis became Christian. And I've tried to read it. I've basically been reading this Owen Barfield book called Poetic Diction, because it's the one that inspired Lewis and Tolkien. They raved about it, so I've been trying to read it, and it's sometimes when I read books, I just know I'm not quite getting it. I've actually asked Isabel, my wife Isabel, to read it because she's really incredibly clever and smart, and I think she will understand it because she's much more poetically inclined and did classics university, and I just feel like the way her brain works is more in tune. So I'm hoping she's going to read it and then tell me what she thinks. But essentially, it's this idea that consciousness has evolved, and a sort of indigenous way of seeing the world was much less focused inside their own heads or our own heads. Their sense of identity and individuality wasn't the same. Their sense of identity, the famous Tyson Yunkaporta, an amazing author of a book called Sand Talk. I'm really hoping to speak to him at some point about this. Talks about how an indigenous, whereas Descartes in the West after the Enlightenment was made us, we're all children of Descartes because of this idea that I think, therefore I am. It's the fact that I think. It's everything about my identity is in my own brain. Lots of us don't really question that. I hadn't really questioned that. But Tyson Yunkaporta said in a video I watched of him being interviewed that an indigenous equivalent would be I'm located, therefore I am. So your sense of identity is about the relation between you and the outside world, your community, your environment. So your sense of self wasn't so individualistic. This completely blows my brain apart. So I find that so interesting that we saw the world in that way. Obviously, post the Enlightenment, we became much more introspective and much more interested in our own thoughts. And Barfield basically, I think, the basis of my understanding of it. What he figured out was that words were the fossils that sort of show this change, and how. Anyway, I sort of think I have got a basic grasp of it, but I don't want to talk about it because I'm just going to get it hopelessly wrong. Anyway, Mark is totally knows this stuff, so I'm really excited to talk to him about that. So that's great news. My other news is I interviewed James Hollis, who wrote this book that completely changed my life when I had left Unbound. Called it's basically a book about midlife and how there comes a point in your life where the way you're living doesn't seem to work anymore. And this is Carl Jung's theory of two adulthoods, which I've written about quite a lot and I've talked about quite a lot. But this is the book where I discovered that concept. And James Hollis is he's a psychoanalyst. He's a doctor. He's 83. Well, he was 83 when I interviewed him 2 years ago. So he's 85 now. And this book was on an episode of Ted Lasso. He tells me that story in an interview I did with him 2 years ago. It was over Zoom, so I'm not sure if we're going to use it for the Do Radio thing because I really want those to be about me visiting people. I want to be going to see them. But he's 83. He lives in a retirement community, I think, outside New York. So it's not entirely practical. And he's still working. When I spoke to him 2 years ago, he was still working part-time. But anyway, he's totally incredible. And this book is completely incredible. It's called The Middle Passage from Misery to Meaning in Midlife. And it's basically what happens when you start to realize that you are not living from your spirit or your soul. And I don't mean that in a religious sense. I mean, you've sort of done the thing that everybody else told you to do. The idea of the second adulthood is the first adulthood is spent when you head out into the world to achieve definitions of success, meaning, and contentment that you accepted from the culture around you when you were young, when you didn't really have the discernment, I suppose, to interrogate those definitions. And the second adulthood is what happens when you figure out that you've got to redefine those definitions for yourself because the ones you were living according to were wrong. And the middle passage, this book, is all about how you navigate the first adulthood and enter the second. And in my life, I see my life up until leaving Unbound as my first adulthood. I mean, I was definitely I've always been curious about the spirit and the soul and the meaning of life. I mean, even as a teenager, I remember when I first became aware of my own mortality. I remember going into school and I was wrestling with the first real stresses and strains in my mind about life and death and eternal death and darkness, and just mortality just scared the shit out of me. And I remember going to school and getting an essay back, a history essay or English essay, and having my spelling corrected. And I remember thinking, we are on a rock spinning through space near a fireball in a seemingly limitless universe, and I've just realized I'm going to die. And I don't obviously knew I was going to die before then, but I wasn't really exploring what that would mean. And the idea that I was being marked for my spelling was just like, what the fuck is wrong with the world? Why is no one dealing with this reality of what's really going on? So I've always been interested in that kind of duality, the way we seem to live and the way we feel in our soul or our hearts or whatever, however you want to frame it, about what matters in life. So I've always had that inkling, but I think I just, like everybody else, I just pursued success. I just went out and tried to do the things that would make other people tell me I was great or something. And after having, success in various ways, I was left feeling empty and lost. And bizarrely, the more successful I seemed to become in the eyes of other people, the less confident I felt in my own skin. And this is a classic middle passage moment where you're like, you've done everything you were supposed to do, but you don't feel the way you're expecting to feel, that you feel you were promised you would feel. And that's when you have to take ownership of your life and decide what you really want your life to be. And that's what the second adulthood is all about. Anyway, so I've discovered this interview that I did with James 2 years ago for a book that I was writing. It's sort of been slightly mothballed, where it's kind of morphed into this, I suppose. So, yeah, that's potentially another episode. I've got to edit it and muck around with it. And if I don't use it, I'll share it here because he's so great and he's so wise and it's such a fascinating conversation. So that's really exciting. In other news, I've confirmed to go to the Realization Festival on the Saturday. So I'm really excited about that. You should look that up if you haven't already. Some incredible speakers. So that's really exciting. And what else? Oh, I'm emailing some other people to try and get more interviews. But what's interesting is they seem to be sort of happening. They seem like the James Hollis thing. I just kind of found that. And even if I'm sure we'll use it in some way, maybe I'll edit it and do a little bit more of a explanation about the second journey and sort of fold in the interview. I don't know, but it just feels like it's beginning to happen, which is really great. And in my other work, I'm doing a LinkedIn Live, if you're interested in that, about Lead Like a River, which is the book I'm writing about leadership. And that I'm really excited about that because one of the things I do professionally is I help entrepreneurs with their origin myth, which is essentially the story that roots them emotionally in the businesses they're running. And what I've discovered is if you can articulate your reason for doing something in the form of a story that obeys the rules of storytelling that enable people to remember it, this origin myth can be devastatingly effective because it becomes the sort of story you tell about why you're doing what you're doing, and how it connects to other people. It allows you to articulate that in a way that other people can reproduce on your behalf when you're not even in the room. And it's really powerful for like fundraising, for getting customers, inspiring your staff. And it's, I think, the most important thing you can do as an entrepreneur is figure out why you're doing it and then tell that story in a way that's going to resonate with the various audiences you have to aim for. So I'm doing that on the 27th of May at 1:00 on LinkedIn. I'll put a link on the page to the way you can sign up for that if you want to watch that. I'll be talking a lot about the book, Lead Like a River, and how it came about, how the idea came about. Yeah, so lots happening and feeling really good about all the different things I'm doing. They all seem to be consistent and connected in different ways. So that's great. So, yeah, that's the update. Check out this book. If any of the stuff I've said about Second Journey makes sense, this is really amazing. I think it's a really bad title, but it's a great book and one I heartily recommend. Awesome. Okay. Thanks for watching. See you next week.